Hey everyone, Joshua Gibson here, and you're listening to another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to the show sponsor, BarShield. BarShield produces a maintenance kit designed to prevent rust and restore spin to a barbell sleeves. The kit comes with a nylon brush, an 8-ounce bottle of anti-rust, anti-wear lubricant, and 3 microfiber towels. It also comes with a simple set of instructions which will have you well on your way to perfectly spinning, beautiful bars. My discount code, PWPodcast, will get you 10% off your entire purchase at checkout. It will also help me to continue producing great podcasts with amazing guests. Head over to barshieldUSA.com and pick up yours now, and you can go follow them on Instagram at BarShieldUSA. That's it for the intro. Now let's get on to this week's podcast with Travis Cooper. We are live, and today I have with me the newly crowned 77 kilo national champion, Travis Cooper. Travis, how are you doing?
How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well. So this is your 4th national title, if I'm correct, right?
It is, yeah.
So how does it feel? I mean, so you've won it multiple times. Is there a different feeling each time you win, or, do you take something away from each separate time, or are they kind of just, the same experience?
Well, this year was different. I mean, I think, each year is difficult in its own way, and almost it gets more difficult each year. This year in particular, the total that won was lower, but it was almost more difficult because of my situation in training. Like, I haven't been training as much. I'm not in as good a shape. And other people, because I've won multiple times, like, you could kind of see the sentiment in the back room, like almost like no one wanted me to win. Like, everybody was kind of gaming against me, and they could see that I wasn't in shape, and almost like everyone was trying to beat me because they saw that I was weak. So yeah, it was very difficult, and it was tough, and it just worked out in my favor. So I was very emotional when I did win. And I showed up knowing that I wasn't my best, I mean, weightlifting is very cut and dry. You know that going in. I didn't go there knowing that I was going to hit PRs. That would be silly. I knew where I was at. I was expecting to hit roughly a 300 kilo total. I hit a 295. So each year is different, and there's a different story behind what goes into it. So it was a great experience, and it had its own story behind it.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear about why you weren't necessarily in shape, and I don't know if injuries had something to do with it. But before we get to that, maybe we can rewind a bit. How you actually got into the sport of weightlifting, because you've been around for a really long time. You've been at the top of the game for a very, very long time. You've hit really impressive numbers. So how'd you actually get into the sport of weightlifting?
Sure. So, growing up, I played like every sport, played, soccer, basketball, hockey, football. And when playing football in middle school, we were in the weight room constantly. And, from middle school to high school. And I didn't realize that Olympic weightlifting was its own sport. And when I decided to quit football, and the only reason I did is just because I kind of realized that I was smaller, meaning like a shorter guy, and I didn't really want to. I maybe could have played like college football, like a D3 school or something, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to pursue like the academics of a good school, and for that reason, I decided to stop football, and I was trying to find something to help me with my wrestling. And really, I just kind of randomly ran into my coach. His name was CJ Stockel. He's still around. He's on the board of directors. And he's a real good guy. And he just kind of took me under his wing, and I started training with him. And I realized that weightlifting was its own sport. And I was like, wow, I always enjoyed the weight room more than other sports. I didn't realize this was its own sport, and I just kind of stuck with it.
Now, you've trained with a lot of teams. Notably, I remember seeing you at MDUSA, and you trained there for quite a while. I remember seeing a couple videos with you back at Cal Strength, just training with them randomly. Now I know you're with East Coast Gold. So throughout all of that time, would you say there are distinct things that you've kind of taken away from each team that you've trained with that you've kind of added to your arsenal as far as developing your own programming, your technique, your training philosophy, and maybe if you can kind of recount your experiences at MDUSA and with East Coast Gold now.
Sure. So I trained with CJ for a few years, and then I lived at the Olympic Training Center where Paul Fleshler was the coach. So I lived out there for 2 years, and then I was at college, and I pursued my my undergraduate degree at Georgia Tech, which is a good engineering school in Atlanta. And then after that, I lived with Glenn for a short period of time in California. And he called me and told me that they were moving to South Carolina, which was close enough for me to make the move to Muscle Driver. And then after Muscle Driver, I've been living in Rhode Island since then, and now I'm on East Coast Gold. So that's kind of synopsis of my story, right? Mm-hmm. But I'll get more in detail on Muscle Driver and Cal Strength and kind of some of more of my experiences, but just in general, weightlifting is very much like the game of chess, I would say. You know, when it comes to programming, there's many ways to go about things. I mean, if you watch different grandmasters play chess, they're going to have different openings, different strategies, but there's grandmasters that play differently, but they're all very good, right? And so but the programming is much like their strategy. Right. And so there's not like one way to go about weightlifting that is so far superior. Like there's a lot of different programming strategies that work and you can be successful doing them. So a lot of people are like one track mind, like, you know, you can only go one way. And that's not necessarily the case. If you do anything and train hard, you're going to be good. And that's one thing that I've found. I've done a lot of different programs. They all work. What it comes down to is living a stress-free lifestyle and prioritizing weightlifting, and that's what allows you to excel in it. I mean, at the end of the day, you only have so much time. So if you're able to prioritize the weightlifting, you're obviously going to excel at it. You know, and then there's times like when I was in college where I was focused on getting my degree, where I had a downtime in weightlifting, and like right now when I'm prioritizing my career, when obviously, I'm not going to be at my best because I'm prioritizing other things over weightlifting, and you just have to do that sometimes in life. It's choices. You know, there's only so much time, and that's just reality. And yeah, feel free to ask me any questions about Muscle Driver you want to. Great experience.
Yeah, I didn't actually know you were at the OTC, and I had Donovan Ford on recently, and he spent 7 years there and kind of gave me the backstory on that. What was your experience like at the OTC, training and living as a full-time weightlifter? I mean, obviously going to Muscle Driver, where you're in a very similar circumstance and you're actually getting paid to lift, and your life kind of revolves around that. Was there much of a transition there, or was the OTC, drastically different from your experiences at Muscle Driver?
So the OTC and Muscle Driver were quite a bit different. Not necessarily in the way the training was set up, but when I was at the OTC, it was during my junior years. I was 19 and 20 years old. So this was 2007, 2008. So this was not Zygmunt was not the coach. It was Paul Fleshler. So the training program was maybe slightly different back then. But it was similar. It was still the 9 times a week, twice a day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, once a day, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, which never changed. It was always the same at Muscle Driver, always the same when Zygmunt took over. And all the same things applied. I would say the one thing about the Olympic Training Center is that you're given services. So I was given a place to live, and they actually gave, at that point in time, later on they didn't give this. I was very, very lucky because I was in college at the time, and I was given a scholarship to college. So I was able to take a lot of my I didn't finish there. I ended up finishing at Georgia Tech, but I was able to get a lot of my base credits, like all my calculus, math, all that kind of stuff at UCCS, University of Colorado Springs, for free. And I was able to get all of my massages, all of the food, all that stuff was free. The way that Muscle Driver was set up was like you received a monthly stipend, and the stipend levels were based on your performance. And with that money, you could buy whatever you wanted. So that was set up differently. Like at the OTC, you were given a service, and if you didn't use that service, you just didn't get it. So if you didn't use massages, you just didn't get that. Whereas at Muscle Driver, you got a certain amount of money based on your performance, and then you could use that money however you wanted. And then if you didn't use that money, you can invest it. You see what I mean? So it was set up slightly differently, but very, very similarly. And I kind of like the Muscle Driver idea better just because it teaches you how to be a real adult.
Yeah. Now, do you think there'll ever be another situation like Muscle Driver in the U.S., or do you think there's an opportunity there for someone to develop a company where they can support weightlifters full time? Because obviously the OTC, the weightlifting portion of it, closed down, and I'm not sure if you have any insight into that. I've heard it was something to do with the amount of money coming in, but do you think it's a possibility to recreate that muscle driver atmosphere?
Yeah, I definitely do. And you know, as far as Muscle Driver goes, the company and the team, like the company failing and the team really had they were slightly connected, but not necessarily, you know, the team wasn't like sucking all the money away from the company. I think there's this perception of that, and you know, that's not necessarily the case. I think it's possible for a company to sponsor a weightlifting team and have it be successful. But, you know, a company does have to be passionate about weightlifting, and they have to, it doesn't always necessarily translate into dollars. And so will a company take that on? I don't know. Is it profitable? I'd probably say it's, you know, as a businessman, I don't know that I would necessarily do what Muscle Driver did. Definitely not in the same way. If I was owner of the company. So it'd be hard, but there's definitely ways to set it up and ways to create an atmosphere. And I think it's really, really important to create an atmosphere where folks can train together and take advantage of an atmosphere in order to get the best out of the athletes. And it really helps. There are some cons to constantly be training in an overstimulated environment. When you're constantly training in an environment where like the environment is so good that it's almost better than the environment that's created at a competition, sometimes it's hard to perform at a competition. So, you know, you always want the competition to be special, and you want to be more amped up at the competition, and you want to get more of those competition jitters than you do in training. So you always got to be aware of that a little bit. So kind of limiting kind of the craziness in the atmosphere that you're creating in training, and the amount of times that you're creating that it kind of seems counterintuitive, but can be good.
Yeah, I never actually thought of that, but I completely understand. At MDUSA, obviously, if you're going to max on an exercise and there's someone in your weight class that's equally as good as you or slightly better, there's always competition that's always driving you to do better. And then when you're at an actual meet, I mean, it's very similar. So it's just like everyday work. So do you think it's useful now that you kind of train maybe more by yourself and limit that big boost of energy to the competition itself?
Yeah, it's definitely useful. I mean, right now, I'm actually moving tomorrow, and I got a promotion in Wilmington, North Carolina, and it's somewhat a coincidence that my coach lives there. So I am going to be living there and training with him in person with the team, and which will be helpful. So there's a balance there, you know.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious, what attracted you to East Coast Gold kind of after MDUSA kind of dissolved and you were back to kind of, you know, trying to figure out where to go from there?
Honestly, I was just looking for a coach that just had the time to communicate. So, you know, I just a guy named Walt Neubauer. So he's my new coach. He's a very good guy out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and he was just able to reach out to me. And there was a time where I'd reach out to a few other people who were in this area near Rhode Island, kind of in the Boston area, and they kind of have been coaches in the past, but they're just very busy now and they're not really in the coaching game. And so while they had done coaching in the past, they just don't have the time to like spin and communicate and do that anymore. And so he was able to reach out to me, and he coaches full time, and it just so happens that he's with East Coast Gold. I wasn't really seeking out East Coast Gold per se. I was just seeking out the right fit for me, and he was linked with East Coast Gold. And as a result, East Coast Golden is an amazing group of folks, and I've been really fortunate to be a part of that group. But that's not something that I was really seeking, was being part of their team. I was really seeking the right coach first, and then that was just a bonus. So, Walt basically coaches full time. He's not really someone who like posts on Instagram a lot and does that kind of thing. So maybe he's not in the limelight. Like, not a lot of people know him, but just a real good dude. Has the time and can spend that time communicating with me.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will wonder, Travis Cooper, this incredibly high-level weightlifter, why does he need a coach? Or why is he looking for a coach if he can just write his own program and just train? So maybe you can explain for them why you sought out a coach and what the coach kind of does for you that you can't do for yourself.
I mean, if I was able to train with like a massive group of people and had like a huge atmosphere, it's possible that I could get away with maybe not having a coach, right? But no matter what, at the competition, you need someone who's able to be at the card table and work that strategy. And, when I've been here in Rhode Island, basically, I go to work 9 to 5, focused on, pursuing my master's degree, my job, and I go to train after work by myself. So no one's really holding me accountable. No one is asking me anything about weightlifting. The average person that I'm in contact with doesn't understand weightlifting in the least. So they don't even understand why I even care about it. And so you kind of get pulled away from the sport, when you kind of turn into the people that you hang out with the most, right? That's kind of this saying. And so the main reason why and what I was looking for in a coach is someone to hold me accountable and someone to talk with about weightlifting, to like keep my mind on it. Just like these goals that I have, like just keep them in my mind and keep them fresh. Because like all these people that I talk to on a daily basis, like, I'm a software developer and I'm a Salesforce developer, basically, particularly on the Salesforce platform is what I mean. And so what I talk to people about on a daily basis is about those things. And like, most of those people, they don't care about weightlifting. They don't really understand what it means and what goes into becoming a national champion. And, even when you do accomplish those things, they don't really care. And so it's just really important to have a group of folks, and the coach is the best person that you can have that holds you accountable and to communicate with about those things. And Walsh has been a great person for me, in that transition to just be able to have those conversations and spend the time,
So, I mean, you've done a lot. You're a national champion. You've competed internationally. You've medaled. Is the end goal the Olympics to qualify for the 2020 Olympics? What are you looking to do going forward, and why are you still in the sport? I mean, it's like you said, it's got to be really tough having a 9 to 5, coming in to train and putting in that same amount of effort that it requires to be at the top. So what keeps Travis Cooper in the sport of weightlifting?
Well, sure. I think for the most part, like everyone's goal is to make the Olympics, right? At a high level anyways. I mean, there's like, last time I believe that there was 3 spots. I feel like I honestly would have gotten one of those spots. It wouldn't have been guaranteed, but there would have been a very, very good chance. I would have at least been in the top 5. I was the only person that made every international team. And so it would have been very, very close. With one spot, Kendra got it, and he certainly deserved that spot. But with 3 spots, it would have totally changed the game. So to get that close and not make it, it's tough. And it's not like it used to be where, back in the day, you used to get so many Olympic spots. And so I'd love to make the Olympics. It's not like my life revolves around that one goal. I just honestly, genuinely like the sport, It's not that I'm just holding on to that goal and that's the only reason why I'm competing. I just enjoy the sport. I like the people. I've been in the sport a long time. Like, even at this last competition, you see a lot of people. You sit down, you have a burger with them, you drink a beer, whatever. You see the same folks for a long time. I plan to coach athletes as I'm done competing. I just really believe in community. And if you really look at what allows people to live a fulfilling life, it is, I guess getting into the philosophical portion of the podcast, right? They show people who live a long life. It's just people who have community, have those conversations with folks. They have relationships. And weightlifting is just one thing in my life. It's not the only thing, but it is one thing that I have long-lasting relationships in. And I think it's great,
Yeah, so. That's actually really interesting you say that. So this isn't, and I'm not like heading for a plug or anything, but do you offer coaching now, or are you just kind of waiting until you make your way out of competing in the sport to start coaching more athletes?
I do offer coaching now, and I do offer online coaching with the weightlifting Scoop team, and we have many competitions with the Barbells and Brews series, and right now we have two locations, so Sugar Creek Brewery in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we have one at Blue Moon in Denver, Colorado. So it's a pretty cool series, and I train people for those as well as the American Open series. We have a couple people who are real good at the Masters level, a couple people who are, making, capable of making like senior nationals, American Open, and a lot of people that are more at like the American Open series level. And I used to, like back in the day when I lived in Atlanta, like kind of before I went to Cal Strength, Muscle Driver, and kind of started working with Glenn, I coached a lot of people. One of the things that I did, I coached one guy. He was a 77, and he was really good. He medaled at junior nationals, medaled at senior nationals in the snatch. Actually, he worked up to where he could snatch 140 as a 77. He wasn't quite as good at the clean and jerk, but I mean, he's a phenomenal weightlifter, and he ended out, not sticking with the sport when I moved, which is unfortunate. But, I mean, he was great. We had an amazing team. I coached the first female weightlifter for Pakistan. She went to Georgia Tech and was a PhD in electrical engineering, really smart lady. And you know how they changed the clothing rules for the IWF? So I coached her, and she qualified for the nationals. And basically what happened is she wasn't allowed to compete at the nationals because for religious reasons she could not wear a singlet. Mm-hmm. And so she appealed the IWF so that she could dress modestly. And so the IWF ended up changing the clothing rules so that you could wear a hijab. And, she called it Lifting Cover. So she has a website called liftingcover.com. And her name's Kulsum Abdullah. And we got to travel to Paris, France, and South Korea to compete in the World Championships so she could represent Pakistan. So I was like the women's coach for Pakistan and the Asian Games in 2012. So, I mean, I got to do a lot of really cool things and a lot of things that maybe people don't know about. But those things, when you look back on them, those are like monumental moments, not only, but just for the world of weightlifting. Those things changed the game. And really, countries like Iran didn't have women's weightlifting until recently. And like her story was all over the news internationally. And here she kind of got a lot of hate. And, even at first I personally was like kind of I didn't want to stir up a lot of controversy, so I was kind of like, okay, is this kind of worth it? But it really was, and it was a big deal.
Yeah, actually, I didn't know that you were so you were such a good coach, or that you made such an impact as a coach and an athlete. I guess most people kind of see like the Travis Cooper and the MDUSA videos, and they see your Instagram videos, but they don't kind of dig a little deeper to discover these things that you've done outside of that. Now, as far as like actual coaching goes, I'm kind of interested to hear, because you spent a lot of time with Glenn. I personally know Glenn, and I went out to his compound, if you'll call it, in Kansas for a training camp. And so I've gotten to know him for a while. So I'm interested to hear what kind of impact he's had on you as a lifter and a coach, and maybe other influences that you've had throughout your career that's kind of transformed the way you go about coaching in the sport and competing in the sport.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, Glenn probably had the largest impact on me as a coach. He was the biggest mentor. So, I would say my first coach, CJ Stockwell, had the biggest, part in getting me into the sport. And that is huge, because without getting into the sport, I wouldn't be where I am today. And then kind of Paul Fleshler took me to the next level. And then I kind of had like a lull period. When you're in the sport for like 10, 15 years, right, you're going to have periods of time where like for a couple years here and there, you're just kind of like not able to do the sport full time. So I kind of had a period like that. And then Glenn kind of took me under his wing, kind of invited me out to California, and I trained there for a couple of months. And he tried to get me to move out there for a while. But I was just like, I can't move out to California. It's so expensive. I just didn't really connect with what was going on at Cal Strength because of just California. So far away from where I was. I was in Atlanta. But then once he called me and he said, we're moving to South Carolina. Would you be interested? That changed the game. I was like, I'm familiar with South Carolina. That's like more my wheelhouse, right? It's cheaper. I can like see this working. It's closer to my family, etc. So I moved out there, and Glenn was a really good coach for me. Kind of took me to the next level, and I think the reason why we work so well together is because I had so much experience in weightlifting already, and he respected my weightlifting knowledge, and that's why our relationship was so special. Because he didn't like say, here's what you have to do on a daily basis, and like give me something, and then if I said, I don't know, I don't think this is for me because something's going on, or I've done this before. If I came back and said, I've tried this before and here's how it worked, he would always listen. And even if secretly maybe he thought that what I was saying was dumb, he always made it seem like he cared and he was compassionate. And we had discussions and came up with a training program that was best for me. And we always work together as a team. And that's what it takes when you are a coach-athlete. Like, the coach is the highest level, right, in a coach-athlete relationship. But when you've been doing a sport for like 10 years already, like, the athlete has to have some input. And the athlete knows some stuff. And at that point, I'd already, like, coached, like I said, like a junior national medalist and a senior national medalist, at least in the snatch and stuff. And had done some things on the coaching side as well. So, like, I wasn't like someone who didn't know anything about weightlifting. So he really allowed me to have that input. And, we did podcasts together. We talked on a daily basis. I think I had more contact with him than anyone on the team. I did seminars with him, so I really was able to pick his brain. We traveled to Australia together. So I feel like I was able to really fully understand his knowledge of weightlifting and kind of pick and choose what I thought made sense. And it's kind of like, a parent and a child, like when you're a parent to like a 5-year-old kid, you tell them what to do. But when you're a parent to like a 21-year-old, like at some point they get to start making their own decisions. And I was like old enough where I was able to kind of pick and choose of Glenn's knowledge and start to make sense of what I thought made sense, and it really worked.
So I recently had James Tatum on, and I mean, he kind of talked about you a little bit, and I'm sure you've developed lasting relationships from MDUSA. And as far as like memories that stick out, I always like to hear from athletes like yourself. You know, if there was anything from MDUSA or maybe anything from a competition in the back room that kind of sticks out in memory, maybe a funny story or just something that was like unexpected. So maybe if you have something like that, you could share it with us.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't know. We always had a good time in training, and I think when we first got there, we had a lot of special times, and I think the closest person that I did get to was James, obviously, just because we did the podcast together and we were kind of in the same weight class. We traveled to Kazakhstan together and roomed together, so we did so many things. So as far as an athlete goes, James was probably the closest person that I got to, and he's just a real good person. He doesn't, it's never easy. One of us had to win, one of us had to lose. So we always took it as best as possible. So it's not like it was easy, but neither of us pitched a fit with each other. I guess we'll put it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you were in 85 for a while, and then you moved down to the 77 class. Was that because you felt more comfortable being a 77, or did you feel like that was your best chance of competing and winning?
I thought that was my best chance of I'd already become a national champion in the 85 kilo weight class, and so I probably could have stayed there and won nationals a couple more times. But I felt like the 77 kilo weight class was my best chance of making the Olympics. And on paper, we thought that we were going to score more points for the team in order to get 3 spots for the Olympics. So that was the rationale behind that decision. It didn't necessarily pan out that way, as you know, but I mean, that was definitely our plan in cutting to the 77 kilo weight class. And at the time, we actually didn't think James was going to go to the 2014 World Championships because his wife was pregnant. And we just really thought that that was going to be a huge loss of an opportunity to score points in the 77 kilo weight class. So I was like, we can't not have 77s go to the Worlds that year. So that was like a big determining factor in cutting at that point in time. And I think it was the right decision. I mean, I think my body's best suited for the 77 kilo weight class. I kind of dealt with an injury that held me back, so I was training to maintain instead of get better. But I still think the weight class is correct for me.
So I guess this would be a great opportunity, since we've touched on the Olympics a couple times now. And you said you were an athlete representative on the board of directors. So obviously you're pretty well versed in a lot of the information that goes on behind the scenes. So as far as qualifying for the Olympics, what does that process look like? I mean, how do we obtain spots, and then how would an athlete take one of those spots?
So this year, I mean, going into 2020, it's going to be a lot different. So it's an individual qualification procedure. So they're going to be changing the weight classes. So here in a couple months, we're going to be finding ourselves with new weight classes. We're going to have 10 weight classes instead of 8, and only 7 of those are going to be Olympic categories. So that's going to be the same for men and women. And so basically there's going to be no team points like the past or anything like that, and there's a new formula called the Roby formula. So it's basically going to be the new Sinclair. And how you qualify for the Olympics is you have to compete internationally 6 times, which is kind of a lot, And you have to compete at least once in each 6-month period, starting in August. And So once in every 6-month period, but really to make it work, it's going to be like twice in every 6-month period, because if you don't compete twice, you're going to be scrambling to get some qualification. And at least 2 of those qualifiers have to be in the Olympic category. Okay, so this Roby points system is like Sinclair, so you can compare different weight classes. So you're going to get your total Roby points, and you're going to get like your top 4 Roby points, and they're going to be added together. And the top 8 weightlifters in the world, 1 per country, are going to get invited to the Olympics. There is a little caveat to that where certain qualifiers have like multipliers. So you got gold, silver, bronze. Worlds is a gold event. Pan Am Championships is a gold event. Then there's some silver events and some bronze events. So the gold events have a 10% multiplier. Silver have a 5%. Bronze have 1 is the multiplier. And you basically add up your top 4 Roby points, and the top 8 in the world get invited to the Olympics. Now, there will be 14 total, so to make up the other slots, the top in each continental will get invited, and then there's going to be 1 other one. So, if we don't have someone in that weight class and we don't have 4 total, then if we have a Pan Am champion, we can potentially get invited. So it goes a little further than that. That's a simplified version. So, but for the listeners out there, it goes pretty deep. So I don't want to, spend so much time talking about the details.
Right. So how do you feel about the changes? I mean, you've spent a lot of time with the previous structure, and now you're getting introduced to the new structure. I mean, do you think it's good these changes are being made? Do you think there are going to be some problems with it? Like, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think we know so little about the qualification procedure and the Roby formula right now that we just don't know.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to have to see it play out. And so in theory, we could talk about it. Yeah, man, I think it could be cool. I think it probably gives us a better chance to qualify more spots. I mean, I think when you look at top 8, so long as CJ and Harrison and lifters like that stay healthy, logic would say those guys should qualify. So right off the bat, we're expecting to get, Sarah Robles, Maddie, CJ and Harrison qualified, which is a good amount of folks. On the men's side, that's already more, right? And then Kane has a good shot to win Pan Ams, or at least be the highest lifter qualified out of Pan Ams that's not already qualified, because Fernando Reyes should qualify under the other procedure. So I feel like we have a great opportunity to qualify more men at least. So it looks good on paper, but we just don't know till it plays out. And it's really hard to tell with all these unknowns. So how are you preparing for the next 2 years leading up to the games? Do you have some kind of loose structure or loose plan that you're kind of functioning off of? Yeah, I mean, until this all came out, I was really just planning on, traditionally you kind of take a year off, and then you take the next year slow, which is kind of where we were at right now, and then you start pushing hard. So that's where I was at. Under this structure, it's somewhat important to make the world team. So, hopefully, if the new job is going smoothly and I can train hard, I would love to make the world team this year, because it's pretty important for this qualification procedure. That's the plan. I mean, if I don't, then whatever. It's not like I'm going to quit weightlifting or anything, but it certainly makes the chances of making the Olympics much more slim, which is okay. When you're talking about pushing your training, do you mean upping the frequency, upping the intensity, upping the volume? I guess it would make more sense to kind of discuss what you're doing right now and what kind of changes you're looking to implement. Sure. So right now I'm training 4 days a week. Oh, okay. And so not nearly as much as I would traditionally, right? Because, working 9 to 5. When I was at Muscle Driver, we were training 9 times a week. Towards the end, when I was somewhat dealing with my SI joint issue, I was going in 9 times a week, but realistically, like 5 of those times were tough training sessions. The other times was just like doing some stuff, right? So right now I'm training like 4 days a week. Realistically, only 2 of them are like tough training sessions. So you can see that's like a lot less volume and a lot less focus on weightlifting. Mm-hmm. So clearly, when you're looking at like getting to a 330 total, or something like that, in order to get back to that, I have to implement quite a bit more volume to get to that point. So I'll be adding in a day a week of training here starting next week. Training for nationals, like I went in with the intention to win, but I went in knowing that it was certainly a possibility that I wouldn't. And I knew that there was guys that were capable of doing as much or more than I was going in capable of doing. So I knew it was going to be tough. And then as I moved back down to North Carolina, the plan is to add a day of training, start training for AO Series 3, which will, in that period of time, like, 13, 14, 15 weeks or however long that is, that's a lot of volume that you're adding to your training system.
Mm-hmm. So as far as looking at yourself as a lifter and analyzing what you need to work on, is it just a matter of doing more work? I mean, do you feel like you having any glaring weaknesses after all this time? I mean, obviously you were a huge squatter, putting up incredibly impressive numbers, and your movements look very good from what I can tell. So do you feel like you have any weaknesses that need to be addressed, or is it just get back in shape?
Well, so my squat right now is really low because I had to take a lot of time off because of my SI joint issue. So now I'm at the point where my SI joint is 100% stable and I'm able to like grind through squat sets. And as a result, it's kind of been a blessing because I've been able to like just work on lighter lifts and my technique is looking a little better and that kind of thing. But going into nationals, like, my squat numbers were not good at all, and I knew that. So basically, I need to focus on getting my strength back, squats, pulls, that kind of thing. That's all where it comes from. I actually feel like my movements are looking slightly better. Continue to work on my overhead. Obviously, my lockout has always been something that I've struggled with. It's not that I've never worked on it or something like that. People always like, the internet coaches always be like, oh, so-and-so needs to work on this or so-and-so needs to work on that. And it's not like those people don't work on that stuff, right? It's just that, like, those things are tough for that person if they focus on them. But those things are the things that those people struggle with. So,
right. I'm always reminded of John North and his jerk. Like, I don't know how many times I hear that it's his weakness and he needs to work on it. And it's almost as like those people don't recognize that he's been aware of that for however long he's been training. And I'm sure similar to you, it's like I'm perfectly well aware of what I need to fix. I mean, constantly bombarding me with those opinions, they won't do anything,
Yeah. So, I mean, those are the things I'll be working on. I used to be like super, super strong. But now the focus is kind of gaining some of that strength back and maintaining the technique. So kind of focus is switched a little bit.
So your overhead, I'm aware that in the snatch it was a little difficult. Now, was it a similar problem in the jerk?
What do you mean, like recently, or
like you said, your overhead position, like your lockout? Was it in both overhead lifts, the snatch and the jerk, that you kind of had an issue?
So I hurt my elbow like a long time ago playing baseball, and then I re-injured it in like this arm wrestling contest a long time ago. So like some stupid stuff, right? So yeah, kind of always my right arm is always kind of giving me an issue in weightlifting. But I mean, in training, it's been really good. At nationals, in the snatch, it was a little bit of an issue, but my jerk, the last jerk I made, it was like a perfect jerk. But you got to remember what I've been doing in training. Like, even though those weights weren't heavy, what I hit in the competition, those were more than I had touched in training. So, just because I train alone, I haven't really been training that often. So, just kind of getting back into things, that was still more than I had touched in training. So when you start to hit like weights that you haven't touched, you're going to start to they're not going to be super crisp all the time.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. And I would like your take on variations of the lifts that you tend to find are most useful for almost everybody. So, like, is there a variation of the snatch or the clean and jerk that you feel like should be included in everybody's program? Like, for example, someone mentioned no hook, no feet snatches. Like, pretty much anybody can benefit from that movement for the most part. Do you find there's anything in your program that tends to always stick around because of its usefulness?
Well, I think your specific question, my answer would be no. I think, except for the lifts. But for me personally, I think, hang power snatch and power snatch is really good. But everyone is so different, man. I mean, you have to individualize it for everyone. So to say that, each person needs to be doing a variation, I think that would be a flawed train of thought. I think, you need to look at someone's individual weakness and you need to figure out, why are you doing this exercise? If you have a rational reason, a logical train of thought, and that lifter knows why they're doing that exercise, then it's a good exercise.
Right. And I guess it kind of goes along with that whole idea. If you're making progress, keep doing it. So if you find a lift that helps you make progress, like, great. I mean, now as far as like exercises that you found that might, and this is tough because it's a similar question, but reverse. Do you feel like there are any exercises that weightlifters should maybe try and actively avoid? And I only bring this up because I remember Don McCauley saying that he doesn't like the no contact snatch for how it teaches the movement. Do you have any opinion on exercises that maybe should not be in a weightlifter's program?
Again, I mean, it just depends,
Do you have any that you tend to shy away from?
Not really. I mean, I think there's no harm in doing everything. If you're strong in all ways, how can that be bad? I think it's really important to be strong in every single way. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do an exercise so much that is ingraining a bad motor pattern. But, I mean, specifically with that particular exercise, it can have some benefits. But, I mean, obviously, I understand where he's coming from with the there are certain people that you wouldn't want to have do that exercise. And I think it just comes down to common sense and logic. There's a reason, and he has a great reason why he wouldn't want certain lifters to do that exercise, and then Norik Bardanian may have a certain logical reason why he would want a certain lifter to do that exercise. They're both right.
Right.
And you just as an individual have to realize, okay, there's certain times when this exercise could be useful. There's certain times when it could be detrimental. When are those times? There's a saying in the Bible that's like, there's a time for everything, in Ecclesiastes. And it's true. There's a time for everything. There's a time for every exercise. You just have to know when to use it.
Right. And that's a very logical way to put it. And, something that always sticks out for me when I talk to Glenn and he would bring you up is he would just say you're an incredibly intelligent lifter, and that you're always kind of aware of what's going on. And I remember you kind of talking about your programming and how you would discuss it with them and say maybe this is right or this isn't right. So it's funny because this all kind of shows as I speak to you through this podcast. So it's nice to kind of be able to relate that from what I've heard from Glenn to now to speaking with you. So maybe transitioning to advice for a weightlifter that's on the edge of qualifying for nationals. From someone that's spent a lot of time in this sport, would you have anything to say to them that would maybe help them take their training to another level or help them kind of get over that hump, right in the middle of the pack?
Definitely. I mean, honestly, there's no secret. It just takes like a long time, which is really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it it took me. Everyone is so much different. So I started out and I started lifting in like 2004, and um, I hit my first um, 300 kilo total in like 2007, and then I hit like a huge spike in like 2008. I had like a 320 total at like 85. So it was like a huge spike, right? So at certain points in time, you're going to have like this massive progress, and then certain periods of time, you're not going to make any progress. Okay, and then sometimes you're going to feel like you're getting worse, and that's okay. Like, just if you stick with things for the long term and you just keep going, you're going to do things that other people will not be able to do, and you'll continue to get better. There's no secret to it. Now, you have to be doing things that are somewhat correct. So you got to find like some mentors that know what's going on in the sport. They don't have to be like the most reputable coach, but you got to make sure that you're evaluating them. Do they know what they're talking about to a certain extent? So I would just find someone who knows what they're talking about. They can put the time in with you. So find a coach who can mentor you, teach you, spend time with you. Because if it's the best coach, but they're not really spending time with you, then what's the point? And, don't get frustrated. At the end of the day, like, you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs, you're going to have plateaus. But if you stick with it longer than the guy next to you, you can't win if you don't show up.
Right. And that's great. Like, that's a phenomenal answer. And I think even people that like recognize that, like myself, it's always reassuring to hear that, because, it is tough going through a down period where your lifts aren't improving or maybe actively getting slightly worse. But as long as you kind of stick with it, it always tends to come back around. So I thank you for that. And I had a great question, but I completely forgot it. So I'll just kind of move on. Now, besides the physical improvements from weightlifting, do you think it would be useful for everyone to like try out the sport? And to kind of explain my rationale for this, like, I feel like it's kind of improved my character, helped me develop my character as I've started weightlifting and continued with it throughout my career. So do you think there's like a rationale for people to strength train or take up weightlifting besides just maybe putting on more muscle or losing more fat?
Sure. I mean, I think that you can say that about any skill, though. But weightlifting's good, and any other skill is good. Just sticking with something. I mean, you have to be able to see what the process of getting better and what putting time into something does. Weightlifting is definitely directly one of those things that, like, what you put into it is what you get out of it, and it's not necessarily all about the totals that you're hitting. I think that even if someone wasn't into weightlifting or even CrossFit, if they're just into fitness for the social aspect of it and they're just getting the health benefits as a side effect, that's great. The community, as I stated before, is a great part of it, and definitely something that can't be overlooked. So I think there's no reason not to try it, go to a couple local meets, and I think that a lot of people will be surprised that they fall in love with it.
Right. It's just something, I think weightlifting just serves as an avenue to kind of get you out of that comfort zone, and anything that kind of pushes you out of it occasionally is great for just helping you explore yourself, and then explore other things, and be introduced to other people, and gather all these experiences that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So like another question that I like to ask most guests that come on the show: what is the worst mistake that you've made as an athlete, and then how would you recommend somebody avoid that same mistake?
I don't know. looking back, I mean, this is silly to say. I mean, I could look back and say there's a lot of things that I could have done differently. Um, I mean, I did sustain an injury, and I could have pulled out of the 2014 Pan Ams. And it's kind of a catch-22 situation because 2014 Pan Ams, I ended out going, I medaled, and that total carried me through a lot of the year. I got a great stipend because of it. I made the world team. And there were so many great things that happened because of that one lift. You know, I made the 184 clean and jerk, but I re-injured myself at that meet. And so maybe if I wouldn't have gone to that meet, I wouldn't have re-injured myself and I wouldn't have dealt with that injury for like the next year and a half. But at the same time, I don't regret it because that going to that meet and making that total opened up so many doors. I don't know. You know, train smart and hard. You know, there's the saying, train smarter, not harder. But you do have to train hard as well. It's not an easy sport, but I'm really confident in all the decisions I've made. I've had a very blessed experience. I've gotten to train at the Olympic Training Center, muscle driver. I'm now an East Coast Gold. I mean, who else can say that? I got to experience what Cal Strength was. I only lived there for like a month, but I mean, it was an amazing experience. I got to live at Louisiana State University Shreveport with Kyle Pierce, and when Kendrick Ferris was like at his prime in like 2008. I mean, so many things, right, that I've experienced in this sport that other people have not. I can't really say that there's been many mistakes. I haven't done everything perfectly, and I did not have the most success out of anyone, but I had my fair share, and I'm pretty confident with what I've accomplished. So
that was actually a similar answer to what Matt Bruce said, and it was like, well, the mistakes I've made have led me up to this point, so they weren't really mistakes in the first place. But as far as like people you've competed against, I'm interested to hear about maybe who was your favorite opponent or who you had the most fun kind of going head to head with throughout your career.
yeah, I mean, I guess it was always interesting to compete against James because, you know, he was always known as like the snatcher. You know, it's kind of funny because really, like, he was known as a snatcher and I was known as the clean and jerker. But if you actually look at the numbers that we actually made in competition, they were like 2 or 3 kilos different in each lift, right? So people had this perception, but the numbers really weren't much different. So, you know, I might make like, you know, 145 and he might make like 147 in the meet. And occasionally he made 150, but they're not like drastically different numbers. So it was always really close and competitive. And then Leo Hernandez was in there, and then Angelo Bianco was in there. But so those were always the 2015 Nationals, I think, was my favorite competition because the 77s and the 94s were the 2 most competitive weight classes. And in our weight class, we had myself, James, and Angelo. And I believe, you know, I'd have to look it up, but I believe Leo Hernandez was probably in there as well. And so to win that Nationals, I feel like that was the Nationals where I came out on top and there was a full pack, and to compete against, you know, all those guys and win was just a great experience. And just because I trained with James and I always knew what he was capable of at the time, that was always fun. There was always a little more uncertainty with Leo Hernandez because he didn't train in the gym, and then Angelo kind of came on strong that last year. But those were always fun competitions.
Yeah, and it's interesting how many times we hear people's names kind of like pop up and then disappear. And like thinking back to it, there have been a lot of lifters that have kind of risen to the top quickly and then kind of faded out. So what's helped you stay in the sport as long as you have? I mean, a lot of people are looking for longevity or to be able to sustain their maybe not peak performance, but sustain performing at a high level for a long period of time. And, 10, 15 years, that requires something else, whether it's mental, just to keep showing up and keep training. I mean, what do you think differentiates you from the people that kind of come up to nationals in a year and then kind of fade off after 2 or 3?
I think one thing is expectations. When I grew up in the sport, I was in the same weight class as Kendrick Ferris, and so I never went to nationals like expecting to win. It's kind of a new thing where, I go to nationals and expect to win, and the internet is a new thing, like forums and stuff like that. And I think it's really a detriment to the sport and the athlete. So when I go to nationals, it's, at this point, I go with the intent of winning, of course. But if I don't win, I walk away with all my other accomplishments that I've made in the past, and I'm okay with it. And I think one of the things that is really tough on athletes is expectations. I think their coaches put expectations on them that are not possible. I think they put expectations on themselves that are not possible. And when they don't reach those expectations, they quit. And when they have a down year, they quit. I think that's the biggest thing that causes that. And even this year, I showed up to nationals and I knew that I wasn't in my best shape. I knew that I had like a chance to win, but I didn't know what was going to happen, But I'm still okay with showing up and showing my face. But you know what? I still got a lot of hate online, even though I won. There's like comments on Reddit like, why does Travis Cooper suck now? And then people like accusing me of being on drugs in the past just because like, okay, yeah, whatever. I'm like focusing on getting my master's degree, working full time, training half as much as I used to. Obviously my performance is not going to be at its best. Like I still showed up, man. Like, why am I getting hate? It sucks. And it's very, if you let it get to you, which I do sometimes, but it's hard not to. But a lot of people let it get to them to the point where they quit.
Yeah, and I guess the podcast was something I wanted to do to get to know everything behind the numbers. So when I talk to an athlete such as yourself or, Jeff Whitmer, whoever I've had on, it's recognizing the numbers that have been put up, the performances that have been completed, how well they've done, but it's also getting to know like what got them up to that point, what happened afterwards, to kind of fill in the gaps. And I think for people that look at those numbers and have all these question marks, this provides them with a few answers. Like, I never realized that Travis went from training, 9 sessions a day to 4 or whatever. Whatever can help make that make sense to them, so that there aren't just these blatant accusations that have no foundation.
Right. And just in general, like, it used to not be like that. And I think the fact that I knew what weightlifting was before there was the internet and Instagram and all that, like I knew what weightlifting was like, and I do it not caring about Instagram, the internet, what people are saying on forums. A lot of people are kind of addicted to the attention they get on Instagram and stuff like that. Like, I don't make a living on weightlifting anymore, and I only partially ever did. And so I think a lot of people become dependent on that, and I don't get a lot of attention on social media. I've never been the most popular weightlifter. Even when I'm doing better than anyone else, no one ever picks me to win nationals, Like, I've never been picked to really win it, except for this year, and that was just because there was no other, like, on the start list. Even though this year, I maybe, just because without context, it looked like I was going to win by a long shot, with context, that wasn't necessarily the case, But every other year, I wasn't necessarily picked to win, which is crazy, because in my opinion, I always felt like I should be picked to win because I'm doing so much better than everyone else. But I've never been popular, and that goes in my favor in continuing to do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think once you once you overstep your boundaries into the social media realm and you create this presence, like people expect you to always live up to that presence that you've created, and sometimes it can kind of pigeonhole you. So almost not having much of a presence, just kind of laying low, just training, it can be more useful than having a huge following and making more money off of it and all of that. So like now with the social media, where do you think weightlifting is going in America? I mean, do you think we're going to become a much more dominant country because we're going to have a bigger pool to draw from? What's your opinion on kind of the current status and future status of American weightlifting?
It's really tough to say. I don't know. I think the social media really has little to do with it. I think by chance we happen to come across CJ Cummings and Harrison Morris, and right now we got a couple girls on the side. Kate Vibert, I mean, she's phenomenal. I am like overly impressed with her right now. Of course, Maddie Rogers. So we come across a couple of these people, but I think it's partially by chance. The weightlifting boom is not necessarily what it was. Like this year's nationals was not like an overly exciting nationals. There wasn't a lot of people there. There wasn't a huge attendance as far as like the amount of weightlifters. So I don't really know where this is going. It doesn't really seem to be growing as fast. But I'm confident in the amount of money that we're able to produce and the amount of following that lifters of that caliber are able to gain, that they're going to be able to. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
That they're going to be able to. Are you able to edit this?
Yeah, I can clip this out.
Yeah, just give me a minute. That happened yesterday too. They're like working on the fire alarm. Yeah, 1 second, it'll stop.
Okay.
But
right. Go ahead.
I'm confident that those lifters will be able to sustain themselves financially to be able to train for the long term, and that's what it takes. You take a lifter like CJ Cummings Harrison and allow them to train and have the money to train and choose weightlifting for 10 years and have the financial ability to do that, they're going to succeed, and that's really what it takes. And I think the social media has allowed them to do that. And I think that they're training smart. I think that they're not trying to show off for social media so much, which is a good thing. They're not maxing out all the time. And I think even their sub-maximal stuff is impressive enough to folks where they're still able to get that attention and sponsors and all that.
So if you could kind of, I guess, predict who you think will make the Olympic team in 2020 based on current performances, who do you think would be filling our squad?
Oh, man, predictions are just that, man.
Yeah.
Predictions are BS. I don't know, man. I would say, realistically, I mean, on the men's side, I would say CJ and Harrison have the best shot. Beyond that, I'm not even going to try to predict. I would say on the women's side, Maddie, Kate Vibert, Sarah Robles, and beyond that, I'm not going to try to predict. But I think those three are the fastest. I wouldn't say that they're all the fastest improving, but I think that the way that the qualification is set up, you have to be at a certain point already, and you have to be able to sustain that for the next 2 years. So I think all those folks have the ability to do that.
Interesting. So as we wrap up, I have one question that I ask nearly everyone that comes on the show. And I stole this from another podcast. So shout out to Danny Lennon from Sigma Nutrition Radio, but it's a phenomenal question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it. So Travis, what is one thing that people can do each day to better their lives? And this can be outside of weightlifting, outside of strength training, just something that people can implement every single day to improve the quality of their life.
I mean, I think that people can read. something. It doesn't have to be for a long time, but I think that people can. I think that you need to read. You need to stay up to date on things, and you need to keep your mind occupied. I think that people that die early tend to be people who don't keep their mind occupied. And I think it's really, really important to be a balanced man or a balanced person, whether you're male or female. There's this concept in my the fraternity that I was in, the balanced man ideal: sound mind, sound body, and sound spirit. So the things that I do personally for those things, sound mind. I'm a software developer, so I enjoy coding and pursuing that. Sound body, obviously weightlifting, and then sound spirit. I read the Bible, and I try to keep my spirit. I try to I try to learn and learn from the stories of the Bible, and I honestly think that that's important. But if that's not your thing, then just try to find things that help you, whether that's meditation or anything else.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I think a lot of people undervalue what reading does. I mean, not only does it help you acquire information that you previously didn't have, but it just opens you up to differing viewpoints and differing opinions and differing trains of thoughts, but also how to think, how to critically think about something, how to analyze information. And there are a lot of skills, and I think people always say that, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but people always say that our school system is flawed. And I don't think it's necessarily that the system is flawed. I think they just assume that they're trying to get something out of it that they're not. But in reality, you're just trying to develop critical thinking skills and how to function outside of that school system. It's not like the actual information that you're trying to take away from it. So I agree completely. Read something every day. That's something I like to do, and I found has very much benefited me. So Travis, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. And as far as contact information, where could our listeners find you if they'd like to receive coaching or to read any kind of articles or blogs you put up, stuff like that?
Yeah, so you can find me at theweightliftingscoop@gmail.com. So that's a good email to reach me at. Also, I do have a website called coopstrong.com. I haven't been blogging on there a lot lately, but there are some old blogs. I posted an old one today on my Facebook. So there's some pretty decent ones I like to think from the past. If you search through there, if you go to theweightliftingscoop.com, there's a blog on there. I'm going to be taking that website down and just kind of taking all the blogs and putting them on Coop Strong though. So anyways, yeah, always a pleasure to do some podcasting. So I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, man.
No problem. Thanks, Coop.